Welcome back to another episode of Financially Irresponsible with Rakim Sabri. I'm going to start off this episode with some help from some friends on 5 ways to improve your financial mental health today. So I've compiled a list of over 100 ways to improve your financial mental health, but today I'm just going to give you guys 5, and then we'll move on to the rest of the show. So way number 1 is to create a budget to track income and expenses. Now, I know that sounds very intuitive, right? Everybody should know that they should have a budget. The problem is many people, despite knowing that they should have a budget, don't have one, and really view budgeting from the perspective of some restricted fad financial diet. And so the framing of budgeting should change to be something that actually gives you flexibility and freedom. Because if you understand the inputs and the outputs of what's happening financially, that is your income versus your expenses, you can make better informed decisions around where you can splurge, where you might need to cut back, and that will have a direct impact on financial stress and financial anxiety, which are going to be one of the topics that we discussed today. So that's way number 1. Way number 2 is to set financial goals and work towards accomplishing them. Many times, intentionality is what's missing in our day-to-day. We just kind of get into this routine of wake up, maybe go to the gym, go to work, come home, make dinner, sit on the couch, do it all over again tomorrow. And so when we have intentional plans around our financial goals, what is it that we would like to accomplish or see in the next 30 days, the next 60 days, the next 90 days, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and we take steps every single day toward accomplishing those goals, listen, the time is going to go by whether we're intentional about using it or not. And so it's just better for us to, in understanding that the time is going to go by, have goals and milestones that we'd like to kind of check off to make sure that we're on track to whatever the destination that we set for ourselves financially and otherwise. So that intentionality is key. Way number 3, establish an emergency fund for unexpected expenses. Now, I personally, as a financial coach, don't like the phrasing emergency fund. I know it's popular. I know people understand it. They know what they should be saving for this big, massive emergency. But I believe that words have power. And so when we name this fund an emergency fund, it's almost like we're kind of holding our breath, waiting for an emergency to occur. And so redefining what it is that we refer to that fund might create a little bit of flexibility and certainly a little bit more mental ease when it comes to putting money aside, because the money that you put aside doesn't necessarily have to be for an emergency. It can be for an unexpected expense that results in a positive for you. Maybe the housing market kind of corrects itself and you are in a position where you can actually put a down payment on a house or a car. Maybe there's some event or vacation that you'd like to partake in that you've been putting money aside for, and you're like, hey, this is something that I can do because I have the money for it. It's not to say that lifestyle expenses and the unexpected expenses that come with maybe having to replace a car tire or get a new set of brakes are the same, but we should be, again, using this word intentional around what we're planning for to take our money and use versus just kind of spending it however and whenever it comes about. Number 4, practice gratitude for what you already have. This is a huge one for me because we live in such a fast-paced world that says, okay, I've done this, now I'm moving on to the next thing. I've done this, now I'm moving on to the next thing. I'll raise my hand. I'm guilty of it as well. And so taking a second to stop and focus on, first of all, our safety and realizing that in this moment, I am safe. I have a place to live. I have heat or AC, I have food to eat, I am safe. And then focusing on the other things that you can be or you can express gratitude around help you to realize that you are actually in a very good position and that maybe you don't need the shiny next new thing. You want it, but you don't necessarily need it. And in that, you can really kind of assess, does that shiny next new thing or experience align with the goals that we talked about you setting for yourself, with the values that you have? Is it something that is important, or is it something that is being pushed because we live in such a consumer-driven economy and environment? And then the last one of this list is seek financial advice from a professional. This is another huge one because there are so many people out there who are posing as financial experts, financial professionals that have no experience in the field, but simply are jumping on the bandwagon because it is popular. There is a term circulating right now called finfluencer, and that's literally financial influencer, where people as young as 17, 18, 19 on TikTok are giving out financial advice, and they have these large followings. So they've stumbled across some piece of information. They're regurgitating this information without knowledge, without practical experience, without having studied what are the long-term impacts of making these choices. And people who are subscribing are eating it all up. Inversely, and I used to be in this camp, there are people who have very heavy experience-driven expertise, but no credential. And because they don't have credential, people may not take them seriously or may not value the experiences that they had in delivering that education. On the end of the individual who doesn't have the credential, they may only see things through the lens of their experience. And that's dangerous because not everybody's experience is going to be the same. As I mentioned in episode 1, that personal finance is personal. And so, yes, we can talk from a place of our own lived experience, and that experience is valuable. But if you are not certified or licensed or have some kind of credential that supports your educating other people, and I know not everybody is going to agree with this, but you can be putting them in harm because you may be either projecting your financial traumas, the lack of experiences that you've had, or maybe some experiences that are outdated as it relates to navigating new financial products and services. And so finding a qualified financial professional, and there are many of us who do different things, and having that financial professional's expertise or area of focus aligned to the area that you are looking for education or knowledge or expertise in is huge. There are people who sell insurance. There are people who sell stocks. There are people who do holistic planning. There are people who do financial counseling, financial therapy. There's so many people in between, people who help with eliminating debt, people who help with student loan debt specifically, people who help with taxes, people who help with real estate. Not every financial professional is the same, and they shouldn't be treated the same. And so finding out, how do you take what it is that you're looking to develop by way of knowledge, by way of exposure, by way of education, and aligning that to the specialties of the individual that you seek out, the financial professional that you seek out, is very important. And more important than any of that is understanding that there are people, unfortunately, out there who will take advantage, who will knowingly take advantage of your ignorance financially so that they can benefit financially by you paying them or subscribing to their content. And those are the scammers, the grifters that we want to avoid. And so that's why having a credential kind of creates a level of, or a layer of insulation against that, because many of the financial credentials do require or have a huge focus on ethics and being ethically responsible to your audience. So those are the 5 ways to improve your financial mental health that I'm going to share with you all today. Going into the next episode, I may share another 5. But we're going to move on into getting to know me a little bit better. So I'm going to share with you my biggest financial accomplishment, my biggest financial failure, or what I perceive as a failure, why the work that I do is important, what is my biggest financial fear, who do I help, and then we'll jump into content around financial anxiety and financial stress. So my biggest financial accomplishment certainly is owning a home. As I shared in the previous episode, I grew up in an apartment. I decided for myself, and I've told this story a million times, that I wanted to be poor when I grew up. And what I mean by that is not that I literally wanted to have the experience of sustained poverty from the time I was a child to the time that I became an adult. But I only knew what I knew, which was living in the apartment. So it didn't occur to me that I could go and own a home at a young age until I was exposed to somebody who owned a home at a young age. And so I had to have been 21 years old. This is just fresh when I'm getting into the financial services industry. I was a part-time teller working for a bank. And I said, I want to be a homeowner in the next 5 years. By the time I turn 25, I want to own a home. I read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, learned about real estate investing, went to a couple of different seminars, and I said, this is doable. I need to save a down payment and I need to improve my credit. Let me take steps towards making that happen. So again, going back to the 5 ways to improve your financial mental health, when I talk about setting a goal and being intentional, at this particular stage in my life, I was very intentional financially. I had a budget. I knew how much money was coming in. I knew how much money was going out. I knew how much money I was saving, and I was saving aggressively because I wanted to have the down payment to buy this house. And although I didn't accomplish my goal necessarily of owning a home by the time I turned 25, I was able to close on a home of my own by the time I was 26, just 1 year later. And so that goal setting, as I share with you, is super important because in setting those goals, maybe you won't necessarily hit the target, but you'll land pretty close to it instead of just kind of hoping and wishing that it happens when it happens. And so the other part, my biggest financial failure, is actually purchasing my favorite car that I've owned. I've owned probably 4 or 5 cars in my life. And my first car was a 1996 Honda Accord. It was a stick shift, green car, very basic. I paid $1,800 to a friend of mine for it. Beautiful car, drove very well. It was a great learner car. And then one day the radiator blew. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? My car's on the highway, smoking, and I'm on my way to work. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And just as I was maybe 10 minutes away from my job, the car started seizing up, and I was just like, I need to pull over right now and make sure that this car doesn't explode on me. I didn't know anything about cars. And so learned that the radiator actually exploded and that I needed to buy a new radiator. And because I didn't know anything about cars and it was my first car, and because I paid so little for the car, little is relative, I thought that it did not make sense for me to invest the money in getting the radiator repaired when the car was falling apart anyway. So I needed to spend the money to buy a new car. So I go on this super search across the state of Connecticut to try to find a car, and I finally find what, as I've shared with you, has been my favorite car that I've owned. It was a 2008 Honda Accord. It was gunmetal gray. It had a leather interior. It was stick shift. It had a V8 engine. Beautiful car, amazing car. And I got it for what I felt like was a steal. I think there was certainly less than 100,000 miles on the car. I paid $10,000 for the car, including trading in the car that I had, the 96 Accord, and I think I gave a down payment of $2,000 to $3,000. Had this car for less than 6 months before dumping another $5,000 into it. And in dumping the $5,000 into that car, I learned that it still needed work. That essentially, once I took it back to Honda, I didn't buy it from Honda, I bought it from some third-party dealer, that the engine needed to be replaced. Like, it needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. And that was going to cost me another $5,000 to $10,000. And so eventually I got the Band-Aid and fixed the car's issue so that it was drivable, and took it to another dealership and leased a new vehicle. And I've been leasing vehicles ever since, because of the trauma associated with, the financial trauma associated with having to pay for maintenance on this vehicle that I just purchased. Like I said, I had it for less than 6 months. It was my favorite car in terms of aesthetics, in terms of the way that it drove, in terms of everything, the interior. It was an amazing car. But I didn't do my due diligence. I thought that the price was right, and I jumped into this without having the proper education on how to navigate the deal, how to navigate the negotiation, and ultimately ended up spending so much more money for a car that I barely even got to drive. So that was my biggest financial failure. Why is the work that I do important? I think, for one, representation is huge. When you think about personal finance and you think about your financial expertise, there is an archetype that people see in their minds. And usually that archetype is significantly older than I am and significantly lighter than I am. So you have older white men dominating the financial services industry and financial education as a whole. And what I've seen over the last 5 years or so is more conversations and more focused spotlighting diversity within financial education. More women, more people of color, more experiences being shared. And so I think anytime somebody pops up who kind of goes against the grain or goes against what is normal, to basically shine a beacon of hope and light for others who have very similar experiences or lived experiences, or experiences that they've heard of, that is important. Beyond that, financial psychology, financial therapy, financial trauma, these all fall within the realm of personal finance, but also within the realm of mental health. And mental health is another very taboo topic. It's a topic that people don't feel comfortable opening up about, just like money. It's a topic that people kind of learn how to cope and navigate within, just like money. And it's a topic that oftentimes cripples people and their mental, psychological navigation of the world. So that's why the work that I do is important. And the topic that I wanted to talk about today is really around financial anxiety and financial stress. And quite literally, financial anxiety is anxiety that is brought on by financial matters. And so how is this anxiety similar and different to generalized anxiety? Well, it's similar in the way that it may show up and manifest in your body through tension, through increased heart rate, increased breathing. Maybe your mind's just, you can't focus on things. And financial anxiety tied into financial stress, or stress that is brought on by financial matters as well, are issues that not only impact you on your day-to-day experiences, right? We look at what is one of the leading causes of divorce within marriages. It's around money. What is an issue that surfaces that impacts people's productivity at work? Worrying about money, worrying about when they're going to get the next raise, worrying about when they're going to get the next bonus. And certainly these incentives are important to keep your employees engaged, or to keep employees engaged if you are an employee. But when we look at the negative impact of anxiety and stress on people, and how they perform, whether they're on their job, whether they're in a relationship, whether they're home or they're single. The impact is very widespread and it's very pronounced. So how do we combat financial anxiety? Well, I think to start, those 5 tips that I gave you guys in the beginning of this episode definitely help. But as somebody who has struggled with anxiety, generalized and financial in the past, one of the things that really works for me and that I advise my clients and other people who are experiencing financial anxiety is bringing yourself into the present moment. And so what does that look like? That looks like mindfulness. Now this sounds like, in financial therapy and all of this sounds like a pseudoscience, but bear with me. When you focus on mindfulness, you're not focusing on the things that you can't control. You're not focusing on what needs to be done tomorrow. You're not even focusing on what needs to be done later today. You're focusing on what is happening right now. And so with financial anxiety and generalized anxiety, it's important, again, to remind yourself that in this very moment, there is no threat to you. There is no threat to your well-being, that you are safe, that you are warm or cool, that you are fed. And so when you take yourself out of survival mode, out of fight or flight mode, and bring yourself into a place where you can let the dominant logic generating or managing part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, kick in, you can then strategize with a clearer mind. Okay, this is the mess that I'm in. I'm acknowledging or taking ownership of the circumstances that I can control, and I am releasing the circumstances that I can't control. And then how can I create a plan towards moving forward so that I can clean up this mess? And so mindfulness is super important. There are different mindfulness activities that you can do: meditation, yoga, running, practicing a martial art, deep breathing, breath activities, journaling, walking. There's so many different ways for you to practice mindfulness. But the important thing is that you are intentional about focusing on what is the now. And so the activity that I do is I go through each one of my 5 senses and I ask myself, what am I feeling or what am I experiencing right now, right? What do I see? What do I taste? What do I smell? What am I feeling? What are the sensations that I'm feeling in my body? Each one of the 5 senses. And I answer those questions and it brings me right into the moment. What is happening right now? And if you can do that, apply to your personal finances. If you could do that, apply to your financial obligations. You can then take the space and the time to write down, what are the goals that I have? What are the things that are hindering me from those goals? What are the expenses? What kind of debt? What are the negative influences on how I spend my money, the money that I get up and I go to work for every day? What are the things that are draining my bank account, and how can I change those things? And so that is one way to combat financial stress and financial anxiety: mindfulness. And I am interested to hear what feedback you guys have on ways to improve your financial stress or your financial anxiety, if it's something that you are working on. Definitely feel free to reach out, and you can find me on my website at www.rakhimsabri.com and all social media at rakhimsabri to learn more and to share your feedback. This has been another wonderful episode of Financially Irresponsible with Rakhim Sabri, and I hope to see you guys on the next one.
I'm your host, Kurt Barwis. Today, I have a very special guest, Dr. Andrew Lin.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Veterans Corner. My name's Chuck Wooden.
Decision for ourselves for this week if we want to be made well.
Hi, welcome to the crack of dawn. It's Dawn Lombardi. I'm starting the painting. It's going to be the clips with some water. Love it.
He took me on the sets of Lost in Space, Batman.
Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time.